Greetings and welcome to Hexed and Countered. I'm Joe. In this video, we are going to be doing some gameplay tutorial style here for the game The Lamps Are Going Out, World War I. This is from Compass Games and is designed by Kirk Uhlmann, and I am going to kind of walk through a turn or two here at the very beginning of the game. We did have a vote on which kind of grand strategic World War I level game you guys would prefer to see, and it was a really, really close vote. But this was the winner, edging out World War I Deluxe Edition from Decision Games and the Paths of Glory from GMT Games, both of which are pretty well-known games as well. So let's meet our combatants. The game divides its forces into 4 distinct groups. So you could theoretically play this as a 4-player game, but we do have the 2 main alliances, and that's kind of how this works. So you have the Western Allies, who are basically France and Great Britain and Italy. So these 3 right here. And then you also have the so-called Eastern Allies, which would be Russia, and then also the United States when it comes into the game, assuming it does later on in the war. Then you have some minors, of course, like Serbia, Romania, potentially Greece, and so on. Now, you can also see the colors, right? These are kind of tan. And Italy doesn't start, as she did not historically. She did not start as one of the combatants, okay? So Italy is neutral at war's beginning. And then the green would indicate the Eastern Bloc, or Eastern Allies as the game terms it. So you have Russia primarily, and then the United States and Romania, which also does not start the game at war, but Serbia does. And Serbia is kind of green as well. Okay, and then on the other side, of course, you have Germany, which has its own. These are our event cards, and you can see the factions, and this is actually the order in which they will progress through the turn. Germany, then the Western Allies, then the Eastern Allies, then the Central Allies. Central Allies, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey, primarily. Bulgaria can also become a member of the Central Powers, or as they're called here, the Central Allies, which is just a way to refer to the non-German members of the Central Powers. So, having said all that, our turn sequence, as I mentioned, runs from Germany to the Western Allies, to the Eastern Allies, to the Central Allies. So the first thing you do is the event card phase. Now, if it were spring, and I should mention this as well, the game turns run 3 months per turn about. They're seasonal in name. Of course, some of the seasons in terms of what can happen in them might be a little bit longer, like summer, I think they referenced, could conceivably be considered to be like a 4-month season because that's the prime campaign season. As it has really always been, winter is not a great time for soldiers to be fighting a war in the northern climes of Europe and so on. So you have your in spring, so spring 1915, which is here, and then spring 16, spring 17, and spring 18, you will rebuild your event deck because the event cards have years on them that span the entire length of the war. The game does cover the entirety of the war from its start in the late summer of 1914, August 1914, through fall of 1918. The war, of course, ended on November 11th, 1918. So then you would draw your event card. So I've already shuffled everything. We're going to draw an event card for Germany. And you can see what it is here. So it is a first line formations. So we can place on a German army a DRM +2 in any combat, or deploy 1 trench at no cost, even in 1914, which is typically a no trench period. Then you would remove the marker at the end of 1915 if not used. If drawn in 1918, draw another event card. Because even though this has not, there are 3 event cards for 1914. There are only 2 turns in 1914, so you will have one that will carry over. And it is conceivable that that may not get drawn at all, or it may not get drawn until late in the war. That's why you have the red note there at the bottom. So each of these events, well, not all of them, but many of them have counters that go with them. And this would be the counter for that. So I can place it. I'm going to put the card down at the bottom of the board, so it's off shot. But I can place this on any of my German armies, and they would get a +2 DRM, as indicated by the card. The second step is your movement phase, where you move armies and artillery. And in the Germans' case, they could redeploy the Staatstruppen, which comes later. They can move fleets, and they can move their U-boats. So speaking of fleets, there's a blockade box right here. 3 British fleets in there. The German High Seas Fleet is sitting here and, at home, basically. And they're not out. But they can move to the blockade box. You can see that you have arrows here. The German fleet can move here. The British fleet can go home, and vice versa. And if we move these up here, we would create a situation where we would have a battle between the navies. Then over here, you have 2 submarine boxes. One is Hague Convention, which basically is, was a more civilized form of submarine warfare as opposed to unrestricted, which is the other one. Under this, you would notify the ship that you were going to sink it, and that would allow you to evacuate the passengers and crew. So Germany started the war under this, but they eventually switched over to unrestricted submarine warfare, which played a large role in drawing the United States into the war. A few things to note about the map. You've probably noticed all the countries have a color. That makes their territory easily recognizable. You see this is Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Germany, Russia, etc. There are, of course, off-map parts for each. You may also notice that some of them have icons on them, like Berlin has a flag. This is the capital, just as Moscow and Petrograd have for Russia. Then we have a factory symbol here with a 2. That is the production points. That's the currency of the game that allows you to do things like build units and refit units that are spent, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So you can see Germany has a bunch of these. All of their territories, all their national territories have at least 1 production point. By contrast, you look at Russia, they don't have a lot, because Russia during the First World War was not very industrialized, and so they only get 1 and 2 up here, and then another 1 from the Caucasus. And you may also notice the squares here. This is the what the game uses instead of having, basically areas. This is a way of limiting and making it easy to remember that each of these can only hold 1 army at a time. You may see up here, we've got multiple armies in different areas, right? We have a British army and a Belgian army in Belgium. The French have a stack of armies here in Verdun. The Germans have a stack of armies here in the Rhine. Then we have 3 in Hanover. That was big enough for me to spread them out. Austria-Hungary has 4 in Galicia, and so on and so forth. But you have circular areas and squares that can only hold, let's just talk about the squares. They can only hold 1. We also have ports. These are places that can be attacked via amphibious invasion. So that is something that you can account for. The only forces that can conduct amphibious invasions are the Western Allies and the United States. What else? Oh, we have snow symbols here, kind of a snowflake. There are winter warfare rules for these areas that have that. The dreaded Russian winter, of course. And then, of course, there's also mountains. So there are terrain effects. Mountains will help the defender in general. Here's our terrain key down here. Defenders get a +1 DRM. You can only have a level 1 trench in those areas. The Pripyat marshes right here have their own symbol as well. You cannot move through there. So you move into there, you have to stop, and then you can move again next turn. No attacks after advancing into the marsh. So if you were to attack, let's say Austria-Hungary or the Germans captured Brest-Litovsk, which is here, pushed these guys back into the Pripyat marshes, on a subsequent turn they could try to attack them here. If they did so and either eliminated or forced the Russians to move, to retreat, they would then be able to move in here, but they could not follow that up by trying to advance into a further territory on that same turn. Then we have flag areas used in victory determination and Russian collapse, right? These are the Russian collapse ones. You also have production areas we talked about, ports. They allow, in addition to amphibious invasions, they allow strategic sea moves to and from. Squares only allow 1 unit, as I mentioned, and can also only hold 1 level 1 trench. Impassable areas such as Switzerland and the Netherlands are impassable and cannot be entered or traversed. And then circle areas would indicate places where you cannot have trenches. And the snow symbol, no big push bonus. We'll talk about the big push when we talk about combat for non-Russian armies attacking in winter. So that's an advantage that the Russians can employ. During the first turn of the game, both sides are locked into their historical plans, which means for the Germans, the Schlieffen Plan, which means that they have to attack Belgium. And because that's what they did historically, they attacked Belgium and France, and they basically were trying to come around through Belgium to get an easier path to Paris, because the bulk of the French army was, as you might expect, along the French-German border. So they have to do that. And then the opposite side of that, the Allies, they have to also use theirs, which was called Plan 17, which requires them to launch a mandatory first attack from Verdun into the German-controlled Rhine area. Because of the rush of the battle, or rush into battle rather, this mandatory attack suffers a harsh -1 die roll modifier. So the flip side, when the Germans do attack with the Schlieffen Plan, they would receive a one-time bonus of +1 production point in the upcoming production phase if they capture Belgium. They are also prohibited from doing much out here on the Eastern Front, which was the historical thing. They kind of held here and pushed, as you can see, they have 2 armies facing the Russians, and they have well more than that facing the Western Allies. Okay, so now we're in the movement phase, and I want to talk about how that works. Generally speaking, you can move a spent unit such as this one. Now, again, they have a rule that they can't move this guy this turn, but in theory, if it was not the first turn of the game, they could move him to Berlin, even though he's spent. Or you could move this guy to Berlin or Bavaria or anywhere that the Germans have a within their territory, basically. Now, what they can't do is, let's say there were no Allied units in Belgium at all, but this is an enemy-controlled area. Even if there's nobody in there, an empty space like southern France, for example, nobody in here. If the Germans were close enough, or the Austrians or whoever were close enough to get in here during movement, they can't do it because there's kind of a garrison, is what they call it, to kind of represent non-army, not big combat formations like the armies are, sitting in here that would defend this area. So you have to attack it even if it's empty. You cannot move into it during the movement phase. So basically what the movement phase is just kind of realigning your forces to either set up an offensive or plug a gap or something along those lines. Now, just to be clear, because I didn't mention this, if the Germans manage to take Belgium and these guys get pushed back and the Germans move into Belgium, that becomes German controlled. Then they can move units in and out of that area. So it's only places that are enemy controlled. And there are also limits on, let's say, the Austrians being able to move. They cannot move anybody into Germany. They can retreat into Germany if they are forced to, but they do have to try to get back into their own territory. That just represents, Germany being kind of the, I guess, senior partner and being protective of their homeland, even when we're talking about Allied forces like those from Austria-Hungary. Oh, and before I forget, only 2 armies can be moved during the phase. That would be 2 Germans, and then 2 Central Allies. That's an important notation too. These guys are locked together. The Turks do get an independent move, as does the United States. So you could move 2 Austrian, and that would be your 2 Central Ally moves, and then you could move a Turkish unit as well. Once Turkey is in the war, which does not happen until the second turn of the game. And the same on the Western Allies side, or the Eastern Allies, I guess, really. The Russians can move too, and then if the United States is in the war, and the Russians are still in the war, they would be able to move a unit as well. Or they could move 2, and the Russians would still only be able to move 1. Same here, Turkey could move 2, and the Austrians would then be limited to 1. So that is, I think, covers movement. Actually, it is not. There is the sea move as well. The British, Western Allies, and the United States are the only ones that can move units by sea. And the way that works is they pick one unit and they can move it from a port to another port. But they're limited to just one of their two moves, and it does count as one of the two moves. So you could move one land unit and then move another one, or do land movement with one and then do sea movement with another. And the United States can do that, and the British or French can also do that. And I guess the Italians as well. It says Western Allies, so I believe that covers all three of them. And one more codicil. Until Turkey is knocked out of the war, the British have two armies that are not on map yet, the IEF and the MEF, that are locked to this theater, the Middle Eastern theater, basically, until Turkey's out of the war. So you cannot use sea movement to take, say, the MEF from Sinai and move it to southern France or Paris or something. You can't do it until Turkey's out of the war. All right, so I'm going to show you combat now, because combat is the next phase, and I'm going to show you sea combat first. So if the Germans were bold or dumb enough, perhaps, to go up here to the blockade to try and break it, it's basically a dice off. So the way this works is pretty simple. Both sides roll one die for each of the fleets they have. So the British would roll 3. So let me put this out here so we can see this. So I'm going to take 3 dice. I'll let the British roll first. Anything that is a 1 is a single hit. Anything that is a 2 would be 2 hits. So in this case, they get 1 hit. So that will be 1 hit that the Germans will have to take. And we'll talk about how that works in a moment. Now I'm going to roll these 2 for the Germans, since they have 2 fleets. And they rolled a 1 and a 2, which is great, because that's 3 hits. So they would force a hit to all 3 British fleets. And what happens is the Germans would get, one of theirs would get flipped to spent, and all 3 British would get flipped. All right, so that is how the battle would be resolved. Now, there are 2 cards or events that can actually change the odds a little bit. The Germans have fire control, and the British have convoys that would modify the result and let them roll dice again. But in this case, the way you would determine the victor is the most fleets that are still alive. So the Germans did not eliminate anybody, nor did the British. So we have the same 3-2 that we started with. So that means the British win, even though all 3 of their fleets took a loss. So the Germans would move back here, and they now have 1 fleet that is fresh and 1 fleet that is spent. And the British have 3 spent fleets. And spent and fresh means fully supplied, ready, undamaged, ready to kind of carry on with the battle. Spent means, like out of ammunition or banged up or, under strength, et cetera, and you have to spend production points to flip them back to fresh. Okay, so let's move on to ground combat. So the Germans, as they are required, will attack Belgium. So they have to attack Belgium. So they move in, right? So this is a mistake that a lot of people make. You don't actually push this guy into that territory. You just say, First Army is attacking Belgium. Now, he doesn't get to move in there until they clear the enemy out. Now, the defender would have the choice of saying, well, I want the Belgians to defend or I want the British to defend. It's like a one-on-one situation. Now, another thing we have is we still have this that we can play, first line formations. So we'll use that, and that gives the Germans a +2 DRM. So when they roll dice, they'll get a +2. Now, the Western Allies will typically choose the Belgians to allow the BEF to perhaps not be forced to a spent mode here on the very first turn of the game, because there is an event card similar to this that would benefit the British. I'm going to return this, actually, and we're going to roll this out. So I will roll for the Germans first. They are the attacker, so we'll roll for them. They get a 2, so that becomes a 4 with the DRM. Now we'll roll for the Belgians. And they roll a 1, so clearly the Germans win. So the Belgians get flipped to spent. The German First Army is also flipped to spent because they were in combat. And the Germans get the big push counter, which gives you a +1 DRM. That goes in Hanover, which is where the attack came from. And now we'll use the Second Army to conduct a follow-on attack, and they will get the +1 die roll modifier. So we'll roll again for the Germans. They get a 3, +1 is a 4. Now the BEF is the defender, because fresh always defends before spent, and trenches always have to be broken. And we'll see that on the French turn when the French attack the Rhine, because that is, I think, the only place there's a trench right now, I think. Yeah, I think that is. Oh, they got a 5. So their 5 beats the Second Army, and they become spent. I forgot. They can re-roll if they lose, because in the Schlieffen Plan, one of the benefits is you get to re-roll 2 rolls. So we're going to re-roll here for the Germans. And they get a 5, and with the +1 from the big push, they end up winning. So now both units in here are spent, as is the Second Army, but the Germans still keep the big push, and they get a third. The Third Army can now attack as well. Okay, so now comes the big roll, which will determine whether or not Germany picks up an extra production point, and that is they have to win one more battle. We have a unit, so they're going to attack. They do get the +1, and they do still have 1 reroll in their pocket. If they win, because both of these defenders are spent, both these guys have to retreat. And if that happens, the Germans can claim Belgium. All right, so let's roll. We'll do the Germans first, as we've been doing. Actually, we should do the defender first, since the Germans have a reroll. So we'll roll for the defenders. Oh, a 6. Oh, I think this is going to fail. The only way the Germans win now is if they roll a 6. Which they do not. It's a tie. And I was wrong, because ties go to the attacker. So these two must both retreat. And this guy moves into Belgium and is spent, I believe. Now, as a bonus, the Germans can move anybody adjacent, regardless of their status, into this box as well. Or area as well, I should say. It's not a box. And so all 3 German armies, despite being spent, are now moved, got turned upside down and flipped over. So they move in to Belgium. So the Germans successfully capture their 1 point, production point. It's a one-time bonus of 1. So that'll get added to the total they already have, which you can add it up here. 1, 4, 6, 9, 10, 12. So they would get 13 when we go to the production phase, which will happen pretty soon, because I don't think, we've got we have 4 armies here, and I don't, which is the only place they can attack, because the point here where they meet, that is not a connection. Like, you can't go from Belgium to Verdun or vice versa, and you can't go from the Rhine to the Somme or vice versa. So there are limits to what you can do. We will be done with combat, I think, and we will move to production phase. So you check the blockade box, which is currently British. That is the first thing you do, as the Germans. It only impacts the Germans. Okay, so in production, as I mentioned, blockade is controlled by Great Britain, which is basically status quo. It has no impact. However, the flip side of that would have an impact. If the Germans control the blockade, then the British actually lose 1 production point to represent German surface raiders, while the Germans gain 1 production point for not being blockaded. But, in this case, with the British controlling the blockade, there is no tangible impact. Everybody gets their standard production points. So in Germany's case, that's 12 plus the bonus 1 for Belgium means they have 13. So once you do that, you would resolve events. Now we we did do this. We used it, so we can actually discard it. We would have been able to put another trench, but I did not use it for that. I used it for the +2 DRM, which actually I think ended up not mattering, because I think we rolled a 2 and they rolled a 1 on that first attack. So now we'll move on to the next thing, which is resolving U-boat attrition. So we roll here on this table. We roll 2d6. And we got a 10. No effect. U-boat remains fresh. Okay, so that's pretty good. Then next is receive transferred production. So we don't have any of that yet. Then we have production spending. So this is where you can refit units and raise new units, construct trenches, and transfer production to your allies. Okay, so I'm going to figure this out off camera, what I want to do, and then I'll come back and we'll do it and recap why. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend 5 production points to refit all of our German spent armies. Okay, so these will both get flipped over. This one is also spent and will get flipped over. So that's 4, and then there's one here in the Rhine, the 7th Army. That gets flipped to fresh as well. Okay, then we will refresh 1 U-boat to give us 2. And the German fleet, that is also spent. That cost us 7. We have 6 left because we had 13. Now, armies, when you raise them, cost 2 production points each. So we're going to build 3 new armies. Now, by rule, under the Schlieffen Plan turn 1 restriction, we can only put 1 in the east, so we will. 10th Army will join the 9th Army in Posen, and we will put the other 2 in the Rhine. So now we've left the French with a really tough nut to crack here as we get close to wrapping up our turn and going into the Western Allies' turn. Okay, so we come to our technology phase and our technology advance. Both sides have their own deck. This is the Central Powers deck, so I'm just going to take the top card, and it is P1, which means I get to keep it, because there are several different categories, like there's A and P, and there's a G, and maybe something else. But anyway, this P is an aerial thing, like plane, I guess, maybe is what it means, or piloting or something. So aerial reconnaissance. So we get the aerial reconnaissance, and we get to keep this. So if it was something like A2 or A3, that would be a later war and has prerequisites of having A1 and or A2, depending on what it is, right? So we can keep this one. But if, in the case of the other one, we would basically get nothing this turn, and it would just go back in the deck, and it gets reshuffled at the start of every turn. So the next time we come to the production phase and get to technology, we will shuffle the deck and move on from there. So that completes the German phase. Basically, there is a regroup phase, but you would just determine aerial superiority. Oh, we do get an air superiority marker, I guess. German places, and we get one because of this. German places 1 additional air superiority marker in any area containing a land-supplied area containing a German army. Okay. So we're going to place an air superiority marker in, I guess we'll do the Rhine. Why not, right? They're in a good shape here because they have trenches, which they will defend. Then they also have mountainous terrain, which gives them a Dyro modifier. So basically, the French are going to have to break the trenches before they can attack the units. All the units are fresh, so they would have to make them all spent before they could push them out of there. So that's a tough nut to crack. I don't think they can actually do it. We have more German forces there than French forces. Unless they were really bold and took this unit from here and moved them there, they could add 1 more unit, which I think would even it out, but you still have to break the trenches first. So that is what the Western Allies are looking at as they begin their turn. Closing out regroup phase, I can show you real quick here on the map. You've got reset heavy artillery. We don't have that yet. That is a technology advance that we do not yet have. Okay, so the Western Allies will draw their event card. They get Pantalons Rouge, which is a DRM -1, one mandatory French attack this turn. So they already have a 1 DRM, -1 DRM when they do this attack. That's part. Basically, the Western Allies kind of get screwed at the beginning. I guess it reflects their I don't know, lesser aggressiveness or getting caught by surprise by the Schlieffen Plan or whatever it may be. Anyway, they're going to get a -1 DRM in addition to the one they already have. So I'm just going to I'll put that on Africa for now so I can see it where it is. These are the circles, which I didn't talk about. We'll get to that later. But yeah, this is Africa, the East Africa, where the British, the Germans, and the Portuguese all had colonies. So there was some fighting there. The German leader, Letov Vorbeck, did an excellent job of kind of guerrilla warfare in Africa. So this is kind of how the game models that. And like I said, we'll get into specifics on that one a little later. So they've drawn their event card. It's not a good one. And we will now go on to the movement phase, where they can, of course, move armies, artillery, and tanks. Well, they only have armies right now. We don't have artillery or tanks yet. Okay, so from a Western Ally standpoint, here's what we're going to do. We have 4 fresh armies here in Verdun. We're going to take 2 of them. We're going to move one to Paris. And we're going to move one to the Somme to help bolster the defense in both places. Because now we'll be able to spend production point to, freshen these guys. But, we need to bulk them up because they're going to be defending, undoubtedly, German attacks here pretty soon. Also, they are forced by rule to make an attack into the Rhine, but they only have to make 1 attack. So we don't have to pile up everybody we can in Verdun and attack. Of course, by moving them out, we have 2 fresh and 1 spent here. So what we end up with is 3 here, 4 here, and then 2 in Paris. Of course, Paris is important because if the Germans get Paris, France is out of the game, right? So we definitely, I think, want to spread the wealth here in terms of the armies. Now, we also drew, unfortunately for the Western Allies, we drew the Pantalons Rouge, which means they have to make a second attack here in turn 1, and that is specifically, or explicitly if you prefer, detailed in the rulebook. So we are going to make an attack. So that's the extent of their moves. They don't have much else to do. Now you may wonder about refitting these fleets that are on blockade. They are allowed to be refit while on station. They still have to. The Allies will still have to spend a production point for each one, but they can refit them without moving them back to the British Isles here. So with that being done, it is now time to move to our combat, of which they have to attack twice. And I mean, they could, in theory, attack here for one of them, but they do have to do at least 1 here from Verdun into the Rhine. So it may be better to actually do them both, but let's do the first one and see what happens. So the Germans will just defend for them with the top unit, the 11th Army. And the French will attack with their 3rd Army. So the Germans roll a 2, which isn't a great roll, but the French get a -1 DRM. They roll a 1, which becomes a 0. So we're just going to flip this guy as spent, and now we'll do the appropriately Pantalon Rouge attack with this fine fellow who has, of course, red pants, as do all the French units, but that's where that comes from, of course. All right, so they're going to roll, and they're attacking the trench, actually. So that's what the defensive roll was. It wasn't the army. It was actually the trench. They have to break the trench first. So they're going to do a second attack here. Now, you might say, well, why don't you just attack Belgium where you don't have a trench to worry about? If we can break the trench, that's a benefit. If we flip if we cause one of these guys to go spent, that's not that much of a benefit, except the Germans have to spend a production point on their next turn to flip it back, because we're not going to get anything else. Well, we could, I guess, but there's only 2 fresh units. They have 3 defending units, so you're not going to be able to shove them out of Belgium. So and the Germans rolled a 6, because I'm doing the defender first now. So man, the French rolled another 1. So definitely not a good turn for the Allies there. And they are done with combat. So now we would go to their production phase. So you check the blockade box. It's the same as it was. We resolve our event, which we already did. They did their required attack. So I'm going to discard that card. Now we would go to the U-boat attacks. So we do U-boat attrition when the Germans are on their turn, and we do their attacks here when the Western Allies are doing their turn. So again, we roll 2d6. We got a 7. So success if unrestricted warfare. So success would result in the loss of 1 Great Britain production point. So that is not a success because we are not using unrestricted submarine warfare. So no effect from the U-boats here in turn 1. Okay, so after that, we go to transferred production. We're not doing that. Production spending. Okay, so now we have to consider what we want to do. The British have 7, the French have 4, and Italy is not yet in the war. They get 7. British have 7 points. So if they were to refresh their 3 ships and the BEF and Belgium, that would spend 5. So that's what they will do. They'll refresh the Belgians, the BEF, and all 3 of their fleets. Then the French, they've got 3 spent here. They will flip all of those. And they will also flip this one in Paris. So all of their armies are fresh. So all of the allies are fresh again. And they are ready for next turn. Because their regroup consists of determining air superiority and resetting heavy artillery, just like the Germans. But none of that happens, so we don't have to worry about it. So the third up is the Eastern Allies, which in this case just mostly means Russia and Serbia. I forgot to draw the technology for the Western Allies. They also, look at that, they get P1 as well. I did shuffle these. This was not by plan. So they also get an aerial recon. So we're going to put ours here in Somme. We already have trenches in Verdun. There's probably not going to be a whole lot of action in here from that standpoint, but we will put the air superiority there in the Somme. So now the Germans would have to get another one, I guess, or move that or something. There are multiples of these, by the way. So, okay, that is going to do it for this video. So until next time, well, before I go through that whole spiel, let's just say that thank you, right? That's what I should say. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Please, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. But in the meantime, while you're here, please consider liking, sharing, hyping. Those all help the video. And or subscribing, which helps the channel. Gives me a little positive feedback. So if you can do any of those things, that would be great. If not, that's okay. Hopefully you'll come back and check out something else down the road, and maybe you'll do one of those things later. Anyway, that is that. Quick shout out to my channel members. Those in the Hexed and Countered categories. We have 2. For more info on that, click the join button. It is for informational purposes, but you can join through that. That would just be the first step. It is not the only step. And so there is no obligation in clicking the join button just to check it out. But we are done for now. I will be back with more gameplay here from The Lamps Are Going Out World War I, from Compass Games and Kirk Uhlmann. This is the 2nd edition. I believe they're coming out with a deluxe edition. So that is something to keep on your radar. But yeah, we are done here now. I'm Joe. This is Hexed and Countered. And until next time, as always, happy gaming.